The autumn wind carried a bitter chill across the rolling grasslands of Montana's Paradise Valley. Mason Calloway pulled his weathered denim jacket tighter as he guided his horse, Rusty, along the eastern edge of his property. At 54, Mason had the leathery skin and quiet confidence of a man who'd spent his life working outdoors. His ranch, spanning nearly 500 acres against the backdrop of the Absaroka Range, had been in his family for 3 generations. "Come on, boy," Mason murmured, patting Rusty's neck as they navigated a steep incline. He needed to check the fence line after last night's storm. 2 of his cattle had wandered onto neighboring property last month, and he couldn't afford another dispute with the new corporate owners who'd bought up the adjacent land. The sky hung heavy and gray, threatening more rain. Mason's boots were already caked with mud, and his back ached from mending a broken irrigation pipe earlier that morning. Times were tough for independent ranchers like him. The drought last summer had forced him to sell off a quarter of his herd, and this year's beef prices weren't promising. As Mason rounded a cluster of ponderosa pines near the property boundary, Rusty suddenly jerked to a halt, ears perked forward. "What is it, boy?" Mason squinted, scanning the tree line. Rusty remained tense, refusing to move forward. That's when Mason heard it, a faint sound almost inaudible beneath the whisper of wind through the pines. A whimper or perhaps a sob. Mason dismounted, tying Rusty's reins to a low branch. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing across the empty landscape. No response came, but as he moved closer to a dense thicket about 50 yards ahead, the sound grew clearer. Someone was crying. Mason pushed through the brush, branches scraping against his jacket. The terrain grew rockier here, dotted with boulders and fallen trees from past storms. The crying stopped abruptly as he approached. "Is someone there?" Mason called again, his hand instinctively moving to the hunting knife at his belt. "I'm not going to hurt you." He stepped around a large boulder and froze. There, in a small clearing, a young girl sat huddled against an ancient cottonwood tree. Her wrists were bound with thick rope tied to the trunk, the skin beneath raw and bleeding. She couldn't have been more than 16, with matted brown hair and wide, terrified eyes that locked onto Mason's face. "Jesus Christ," Mason breathed, rushing forward. The girl flinched violently, trying to press herself further against the tree. "It's okay," he said softly, holding up his hands. "I'm going to help you." Her clothes, jeans and a once white t-shirt, were filthy and torn. Dark bruises circled her neck and dried blood crusted one side of her face. Mason knelt slowly, maintaining distance to avoid frightening her further. "My name's Mason Calloway. This is my ranch. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's lips trembled, but no sound emerged. Her eyes darted frantically around the clearing as if searching for someone else. "Whoever did this to you isn't here now," Mason assured her, carefully retrieving his knife. "I'm going to cut these ropes, okay? Then we'll get you somewhere safe." As he carefully sawed through the thick ropes, Mason noticed how thin the girl's wrists were, how her shoulders hunched protectively inward. She remained utterly silent, though tears continued to stream down her dirt-streaked face. "There we go," Mason said as the last rope fell away. "Can you stand?" The girl attempted to rise but collapsed immediately. Mason hesitated, then gently gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fact that sent a surge of anger through him. Who could do this to a child? "I'm taking you back to my house," he explained as he carried her through the brush. "My truck's there. We need to get you to a hospital." Rusty nickered nervously as they approached, and the girl buried her face against Mason's chest. "It's just my horse," Mason soothed. "He won't hurt you." Mounting Rusty while holding the girl proved challenging, but Mason managed it with careful movements. As they rode back toward the ranch house, the girl's breathing grew more even, though she still hadn't spoken a word. Mason's mind raced. The nearest hospital was in Livingston, about 40 minutes away. He needed to call the sheriff too, but first he had to get this child somewhere warm and safe. The main house came into view, a 2-story structure of timber and stone that had stood for nearly a century. Mason's wife, Sarah, had always kept flowers along the front porch, but since her passing 3 years ago, the planters had remained empty. As he guided Rusty toward the barn, the girl suddenly gripped his jacket. "He'll come back," she whispered, her voice so hoarse and quiet that Mason barely caught the words. "Who?" Mason asked, helping her down from the horse. "Who did this to you?" The girl's eyes, a pale blue that reminded him painfully of Sarah's, met his for the first time. "My father," she said. Sheriff Eleanor Ellie Ramirez drummed her fingers against the steering wheel of her patrol SUV as she turned onto the gravel road leading to the Calloway Ranch. 23 years in law enforcement, 15 of them as sheriff of Park County, and she'd never seen a case quite like this. Rain pelted the windshield as she navigated the increasingly muddy road. The storm had intensified, transforming the usually scenic drive into a treacherous journey. Ellie had grown up in this county, knew every ranch and family for miles, including Mason Calloway. A good man who'd had his share of hardships. When his call had come in 30 minutes ago, the tightness in his voice told her everything she needed to know about the seriousness of the situation. The Calloway Ranch house appeared through the curtain of rain, lights glowing warmly against the darkening afternoon. Ellie pulled up beside Mason's mud-splattered pickup and killed the engine. Inside, Mason stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He straightened when Ellie entered, relief visible on his weathered face. "Where is she?" Ellie asked, removing her rain-soaked hat. "Guest bedroom. Dr. Patel's with her now," Mason replied, nodding toward the hallway. "I would have taken her straight to the hospital, but the roads were washing out. Patricia said to keep her stable here until the worst passes." Dr. Patricia Patel had been the local physician for over a decade, handling everything from births to broken bones across the valley's scattered ranches and homes. "You did the right thing," Ellie assured him. "Tell me exactly what happened." As Mason recounted finding the girl, Ellie took notes, her expression growing grimmer by the minute. "Has she said anything else about her father?" she asked when he finished. Mason shook his head. "Nothing. After that first mention she went completely silent again. Doc Patel thinks it's traumatic mutism, temporary probably." A door opened down the hall, and Dr. Patel emerged, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She carried her medical bag in one hand and gestured for them to stay in the kitchen. "How is she?" Ellie asked once the doctor joined them. "Physically, she's suffering from exposure, dehydration and malnutrition," Dr. Patel explained. "The wounds on her wrists need monitoring for infection, but I've cleaned and dressed them. There are older injuries too, healed fractures in her right arm and 2 ribs that show signs of previous trauma." "Abuse?" Ellie stated flatly. "Consistent with long-term physical abuse, yes," Dr. Patel confirmed. "I've sedated her lightly. She needs rest and fluids. Once the storm passes, she should be transported to Livingston for a full workup." "Did you find any identification?" Ellie asked. "Nothing," Mason answered. Her clothes had no labels either, like they'd been deliberately removed. Ellie's phone buzzed. "Ramirez," she answered, stepping away from the others. After a brief conversation, she returned, her expression troubled. "That was dispatch. We've got no reports of missing teenage girls matching her description in Park County. I'm expanding the search to neighboring counties and checking the national database." "What about her father?" Mason asked. "If what she said is true." "We don't know that's her father," Ellie interrupted gently. "Abusers often force victims to call them family terms. But we're looking into all possibilities." A crash of thunder shook the house, causing the lights to flicker momentarily. "The storm's getting worse," Dr. Patel observed. "I should get back to the clinic before the roads become impassable." "I'll follow you to make sure you get there safely," Ellie said, then turned to Mason. "Can you stay with her until I return? I don't want her left alone." Mason nodded. "Of course. Sarah kept some of our daughter's old clothes. They might fit her." Ellie squeezed his shoulder. "I know this brings up memories, Mason. Jennifer would be about her age now, wouldn't she?" A shadow crossed Mason's face. 22 next month, he said quietly. After Ellie and Dr. Patel departed, Mason checked on the sleeping girl. Her face, cleaned of dirt and blood, looked younger and more vulnerable. Dr. Patel had helped her shower and change into a clean t-shirt and sweatpants that hung loosely on her thin frame. Mason settled into the chair beside the bed, listening to the rain hammering against the roof. His daughter Jennifer had left home at 17, cutting all contact after a bitter argument with him and Sarah. 3 months later, Sarah was diagnosed with cancer. She died still waiting for a call that never came. The girl stirred, whimpering in her sleep. Mason leaned forward, gently adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I promise." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the old ranch house, a fragile calm prevailed, at least for now. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the guest bedroom, falling across the empty bed. The sheets were pulled back, the pillow still bearing the indent of a head. Mason, who had fallen asleep in the armchair, jolted awake. "Hello?" he called, rising stiffly. When no answer came, a spike of panic shot through him. He moved quickly through the house, checking each room. The front door remained locked, but the back door stood slightly ajar. Mason pushed it open, stepping onto the back porch. There, seated on the bottom step, was the girl. She had wrapped herself in a quilt and was staring out at the mountains, now crisp and clear against the washed blue sky. Mason exhaled in relief. "You gave me a scare," he said, keeping his voice gentle. The girl turned slightly, acknowledging his presence but not meeting his eyes. "Mind if I join you?" Mason asked. When she didn't object, he lowered himself onto the step beside her, careful to leave space between them. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching as the rising sun gradually illuminated the valley. In the distance, Mason's cattle grazed peacefully, untroubled by the night's tempest. "It's beautiful here," the girl finally whispered, her voice so soft Mason almost missed it. "It is," he agreed, trying to contain his surprise at hearing her speak. "Been in my family for generations." Another silence stretched between them, more comfortable than the last. "My name is Lily," she said suddenly, still looking straight ahead. "Lily Harmon." Mason nodded, careful not to make a big deal of this revelation. "Nice to meet you properly, Lily. I'm Mason." "I remember," she said. Then after a pause, "Thank you for cutting me free." "Anyone would have done the same," Mason replied. Lily shook her head slightly. "No, they wouldn't." Before Mason could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced Sheriff Ramirez's return. Lily tensed immediately, the quilt tightening around her shoulders. "That's just the sheriff," Mason explained. "She's here to help you." Lily's eyes darted toward the approaching vehicle, then back to Mason. "Did you tell her what I said? About my father?" "I did," Mason admitted. "We need to find who did this to you, Lily." Something like resignation passed across her face. "You won't believe me." "Try me," Mason said. But Lily had closed up again, rising from the step and retreating into the house. Sheriff Ramirez approached, noting the girl's hasty departure. "Progress?" she asked. "Her name's Lily Harmon," Mason replied. "That's all I got." Inside they found Lily seated at the kitchen table, the quilt still wrapped protectively around her. Ellie pulled up a chair across from her, while Mason busied himself making coffee. "Hello, Lily," Ellie said warmly. "I'm Sheriff Ramirez, but you can call me Ellie. I'm glad to see you're feeling a bit better today." Lily nodded but remained silent. "I've been looking for reports of missing girls matching your description," Ellie continued. "There's nothing local, but I did find something interesting from Idaho. A Lily Harmon was reported missing from Coeur d'Alene 3 months ago." Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "That report was filed by a Richard Harmon, who identified himself as your father," Ellie said carefully, watching the girl's reaction. The color drained from Lily's face. "He's not my father," she whispered fiercely. "He's a monster who bought me." The mug Mason was holding crashed to the floor, shattering in the sudden silence. "Bought you?" Ellie repeated, her voice steady despite the shock in her eyes. Lily's words came in a rush now, as if a dam had broken. "My real parents died in a car accident when I was 9. I went into foster care. Richard and his wife Marianne adopted me 2 years later. Everything was okay at first, but then Marianne got sick. Cancer. After she died, Richard changed." Mason slowly cleaned up the broken mug, not wanting to interrupt Lily's flow of words. "He started drinking, lost his job. Then men began coming to the house." Lily's voice dropped lower. "Richard told me I had to do what they wanted or he'd send me back to foster care. Said no one would believe me anyway." Ellie reached across the table, but stopped short of touching Lily's hand. "I believe you, Lily." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "One of them, a man named Carter, he seemed different. Kinder. He helped me escape. We were driving to Seattle when Richard found us at a gas station. He shot Carter and took me." "And brought you here?" Mason asked, unable to keep silent any longer. Lily nodded. "He said he was taking me somewhere no one would ever find me. We drove for days. When we got to the mountains, he marched me into the woods at gunpoint, tied me to that tree. Said he'd come back when he figured out what to do with me." "How long were you there?" Ellie asked. 3 days, I think. It rained the last night. I thought I was going to die." Lily looked up at Mason. "Then you came." Ellie's phone rang and she stepped into the hallway to answer it. When she returned, her expression was grim. "That was my deputy. Richard Harmon checked into the Yellowstone River Lodge 3 days ago. Paid cash, kept to himself. His room's been empty since yesterday." "He's still out there," Lily whispered, terror evident in her voice. Not for long, Ellie promised. I've put out an APB. Every law enforcement officer in 3 states is looking for him now. Mason moved to the window, gazing out at his property with new eyes. The vast open spaces that had always represented freedom now seemed dangerously exposed. She can't stay here, he said. It's not safe. Actually, Ellie countered, this might be the safest place for her right now. The hospital and sheriff's office would be the first places he'd look. Here we can keep her hidden while we track him down. He'll kill me if he finds me, Lily said, her voice hollow. And anyone who tries to help me. Mason turned from the window, his jaw set in determination. Let him try. 3 days passed with no sign of Richard Harmon. Sheriff Ramirez had stationed a deputy at the entrance to Mason's property, but the vast perimeter of the ranch remained impossible to fully secure. Mason converted his rarely used home office into a makeshift command center. Maps of the surrounding area covered the walls, marked with possible approaches to the ranch. His rifle, normally reserved for hunting season, now stood loaded by the back door. Lily had begun to emerge from her shell, helping with small chores around the house and even accompanying Mason to feed the horses each morning. The simple routine seemed to ground her, providing moments of normalcy amid the constant vigilance. On the 4th morning, Mason found her in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to crack eggs into a bowl. Sarah used to make the best breakfast scramble, Mason said, reaching for a whisk. Want me to show you her secret? Lily nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. As they cooked together, Mason noticed how she no longer flinched when he moved near her, how her shoulders had begun to relax from their perpetual hunch. My daughter Jennifer was about your age when she left, Mason said, carefully folding cheese into the eggs. She was a good cook too. Where did she go? Lily asked, setting plates on the table. Mason's hands stilled momentarily. California, last I heard. We had a falling out. I was stricter than I should have been, couldn't accept some of her choices. Do you miss her? Every day, Mason admitted. Sarah and I both did. My wife wrote her letters every week, even when Jen never wrote back. What happened to your wife? Lily asked, then immediately backtracked. I'm sorry, that's too personal. No, it's okay, Mason assured her. Sarah had ovarian cancer. It was advanced by the time they caught it. She fought hard, but... He trailed off, focusing on dividing the eggs between their plates. I'm sorry, Lily said sincerely. They ate in companionable silence until the sound of tires on gravel announced Sheriff Ramirez's arrival for her daily check-in. Ellie entered, removing her hat and declining Mason's offer of coffee. We've got a lead, she said without preamble. Harmon's credit card was used at a gas station in Bozeman yesterday. Security footage confirms it was him. Bozeman's only an hour away, Mason noted, tension returning to his shoulders. We've got patrols canvassing the area, but he's moving around. The gas station attendant remembers him asking about ranches in Paradise Valley. Lily's fork clattered against her plate. He's looking for me. We'll find him first, Ellie promised. I've called in additional deputies and contacted the state police. In the meantime, I want you both to stay on the property. Mason, is your cell phone charged? Mason nodded, automatically checking the device in his pocket. Good. I've got to get back to coordinate the search, but I'll have a deputy here within the hour to relieve Daniel at the gate. After Ellie departed, the mood in the house grew somber. Lily retreated to the guest room, while Mason checked and rechecked the locks on every window and door. By afternoon, dark clouds had gathered again, threatening another storm. Mason stood on the front porch, scanning the horizon with a pair of binoculars. The wind carried the scent of rain and something else, a faint trace of cigarette smoke. Mason frowned. He didn't smoke, and neither did Deputy Daniel, stationed at the front gate nearly half a mile away. Moving carefully back inside, Mason retrieved his rifle and called softly to Lily. Stay in your room, lock the door, he instructed when she appeared in the hallway. Don't come out unless you hear my voice. Fear flashed in her eyes, but she nodded and disappeared back into the bedroom. Mason heard the lock click into place. He dialed Ellie's number, keeping his voice low. Someone's on the property, he whispered. I can smell cigarette smoke from the north side, near the old barn. I'm 15 minutes out, Ellie responded. Deputy Wilson is closer, maybe 5 minutes? Stay inside, Mason. But as Mason ended the call, he heard a noise from the back of the house, the soft creak of the screen door he'd neglected to lock after bringing in firewood earlier. Moving silently down the hallway, Mason positioned himself where he could see into the kitchen. A man stood with his back to Mason, methodically opening drawers. That's far enough, Mason said, raising his rifle. Hands where I can see them. The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. Easy now, he said, his voice eerily calm. I'm just looking for my daughter. Richard Harmon was shorter than Mason had imagined, with thinning brown hair and the soft physique of someone who'd once been athletic but had long since given up trying. Only his eyes, cold and calculating, hinted at the danger Lily had described. Your daughter? Mason repeated, keeping the rifle steady. You mean the girl you chained to a tree and left to die? Harmon's expression hardened. You don't understand the situation. Lily's troubled, dangerous even. She's lied to you. I don't think so, Mason replied. The sheriff is on her way. You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself at the station. A humorless smile spread across Harmon's face. I don't think the sheriff will be joining us anytime soon. The deputy at your gate had an unfortunate accident. Hit his head when he slipped in the mud. Terrible shame. Mason's grip on the rifle tightened. If you've hurt him. He'll live, Harmon interrupted dismissively. Now where's my daughter? Safe from you, Mason said. That's all that matters. Harmon sighed as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. Let me explain something, Mr. Calloway. Yes, I know who you are. I've been watching this place for days. You're a simple rancher who's meddled in something you don't understand. I understand enough, Mason countered. I understand that you're going to jail for a very long time. Am I? Harmon asked, his hand moving slightly toward his jacket pocket. The way I see it, this ends one of two ways. Either you give me Lily and I disappear, or things get messy for everyone involved. Don't move, Mason warned, noticing the subtle shift in Harmon's posture. But Harmon was already lunging forward, faster than his appearance suggested possible. Something metallic flashed in his hand, a hunting knife, its blade catching the kitchen light. Mason fired, the shot deafening in the confined space. Harmon staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he charged forward with surprising strength, crashing into Mason and sending them both to the floor. The rifle skittered away across the hardwood. Pain exploded in Mason's side as the knife found its mark. He grappled with Harmon, desperately trying to control the hand wielding the blade. Despite the bullet wound in his shoulder, Harmon fought with the frenzied strength of a cornered animal. Where is she? Harmon demanded, his face inches from Mason's, spittle flying from his lips. Tell me where she is. Mason said nothing, using all his strength to keep the knife from plunging into his chest. His side burned where the blade had already cut him, warm blood soaking his shirt. A sudden crash made both men look up. Lily stood in the doorway, Mason's old baseball bat gripped in her hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with a fury that transformed her. Get away from him, she commanded, her voice stronger than Mason had ever heard it. Harmon's expression shifted to something almost tender. Lily, sweetheart. I've been so worried. Shut up, Lily spat. Don't pretend you care. You sold me. You left me to die. You don't understand, Harmon began, but Lily cut him off. I understand everything now, she said, stepping closer. You never loved me. You never loved Marianne either. You only love yourself. Harmon's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little... He lunged toward her, the knife still clutched in his hand. Mason grabbed Harmon's ankle, causing him to stumble. In that moment, Lily swung the bat with all her strength. It connected with Harmon's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, the knife falling from his limp fingers. Mason scrambled away, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. Lily, he gasped. Are you okay? She stood frozen, the bat still raised, staring at Harmon's motionless form. Is he? No, Mason assured her, checking Harmon's pulse. But he's out cold. We need to tie him up before he comes to. Together, they bound Harmon with extension cords, Mason working through the pain in his side. Once Harmon was secured, Lily helped Mason to the couch and examined his wound. It's not too deep, she said, applying pressure with a kitchen towel. But you need a doctor. First things first, Mason replied, reaching for his phone. We need to call Ellie and check on that deputy. As Mason made the call, Lily kept her eyes fixed on Harmon, the bat now resting across her knees. The fear that had haunted her since Mason found her had been replaced by something else. A steadiness, a resolve that spoke of survival and, perhaps, the first tentative steps toward healing. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Mason sat propped up in bed, 16 stitches in his side and a bottle of painkillers on the bedside table. Sheriff Ramirez entered, looking tired but satisfied. Doctor says you're being released tomorrow, she said, settling into the visitor's chair. How's the pain? Manageable, Mason replied, shifting slightly to find a more comfortable position. How's Deputy Daniel? Concussion and a sprained wrist, but he'll be fine. Blames himself for letting Harmon sneak past him. Not his fault, Mason said. Harmon's craftier than he looks. Ellie nodded in agreement. Speaking of Harmon, I thought you might want an update. The FBI has taken over the case. Turns out Lily wasn't his first victim. They've linked him to a trafficking ring operating across 3 states. Mason closed his eyes briefly, the implications hitting him hard. And Lily? Where is she now? Social Services has temporary custody. She's staying with a foster family in Bozeman until the hearing next week. Ellie hesitated before continuing. She's asked about you several times. Wanted to make sure you were okay. A small smile crossed Mason's face. She's tougher than she looks. Saved my life with that baseball bat. She said the same about you, Ellie replied. The psychologist who evaluated her says she's showing remarkable resilience, all things considered. What happens to her now? Mason asked, the question that had been weighing on him since the ambulance ride 3 days ago. Ellie leaned forward, her expression serious. That's partly why I'm here, Mason. Lily has no living relatives willing to take her in. She'll likely enter the foster system again, probably placed somewhere out of state given the circumstances. Mason stared out the window at the mountains in the distance, their peaks illuminated by the afternoon sun. Unless, Ellie continued carefully, someone local applied for emergency foster care status. Mason turned back to her, his heart suddenly beating faster than the monitor could track. You think I could? It wouldn't be easy, Ellie cautioned. There would be background checks, home inspections, regular visits from social workers. And given what Lily's been through, she'd need therapy, stability, patience. I've got plenty of all 3, Mason said, his mind already racing ahead. The ranch house has more than enough room. I could convert Jennifer's old bedroom. He stopped abruptly, a shadow crossing his face. Ellie reached over and squeezed his hand. This isn't about replacing your daughter, Mason. It's about helping a girl who needs someone in her corner. I know, Mason said quietly. And I want to help her. What if I fail her too? You won't, Ellie said with conviction. But if you're serious about this, we should start the paperwork now. The hearing's on Tuesday. 5 days later, Mason stood in the courthouse hallway, nervously adjusting his tie. He'd worn a suit only twice in the past decade, at Sarah's funeral and at Jennifer's high school graduation. The stiff collar chafed against his neck, but he'd wanted to make a good impression. Mr. Calloway? Mason turned to see a petite woman with a clipboard approaching. The judge is ready to see you now, she said, gesturing toward the courtroom doors. Inside, the proceedings moved with surprising speed. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, reviewed the emergency placement request, asked Mason a series of pointed questions about his intentions and resources, and conferred briefly with the social worker assigned to Lily's case. Throughout it all, Lily sat quietly at a table with her temporary guardian, occasionally glancing at Mason with an expression he couldn't quite read. Given the extraordinary circumstances, the judge finally announced, and the recommendation of both Sheriff Ramirez and Dr. Patel, I'm approving the emergency placement of Lily Harmon with Mason Calloway for a probationary period of 6 months. Relief flooded through Mason. He caught Lily's eye and saw, for the first time since he'd cut her free from that tree, a genuine smile transform her face. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Lily gazed out the window at the passing landscape, occasionally pointing out wildlife, a red-tailed hawk soaring overhead, a family of deer grazing in a meadow. As they turned onto the gravel road leading to the house, Mason cleared his throat. I made some changes to the guest room. If you don't like it, we can redecorate. Lily nodded. Thank you. And school, we can look into options. There's the public school in town, or maybe homeschooling for a while if that would be easier. I'd like to try regular school, Lily said. Eventually. Mason smiled. Whatever you want. No rush. They pulled up to the house where Sheriff Ramirez's SUV was already parked. Ellie stood on the porch, along with Dr. Patel and, to Mason's surprise, several of his neighboring ranchers and their families. A hand-painted banner hung from the porch railing. Welcome home, Lily. What's all this? Lily asked, her eyes wide. Just some folks who wanted to welcome you properly, Mason explained. Is it too much? We can ask them to leave if you're not up for company. Lily considered this, then shook her head. No, it's nice. I'd like to meet them. As they approached the porch, Mason felt Lily's hand slip into his. He gave it a gentle squeeze. "Ready?" he asked. Lily took a deep breath, then nodded. "Ready." Together they climbed the steps to begin the next chapter. 3 months later, Mason stood in the doorway of the barn, watching as Lily confidently led Rusty through his evening brushing routine. Her hair, now healthy and growing out, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. The haunted look that had once dominated her features had been replaced by focused concentration. "You're getting good at that," Mason observed, stepping into the warm, hay-scented space. Lily glanced up, a small smile playing at her lips. "He's a good teacher," she said, patting Rusty's neck. "Aren't you, boy?" The horse nickered softly in response. "Sheriff Ramirez called," Mason said, leaning against a post. "Harmon's trial is set for next month. The prosecutor says with the evidence they've gathered, he'll be away for a very long time." Lily's hands stilled momentarily, then resumed their rhythmic brushing. "Good. You don't have to testify if you don't want to," Mason reminded her. "They have enough without your statement." "I want to," Lily said firmly. "I need to face him one more time, let him know he doesn't scare me anymore." Pride swelled in Mason's chest. "You're the bravest person I know, Lily Harmon." She shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "Not brave. Just surviving." "Sometimes that's the same thing," Mason replied. As they finished the evening chores, the setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel, unchanged by the human dramas that played out beneath them. Mason thought about the events that had brought Lily into his life, the terrible cruelty she had endured, the chance discovery that had saved her, and the courage she showed every day in rebuilding her life. He thought too of his own journey from loneliness to purpose, from grief to a different kin.